Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to have asynchronous type of learning, and today I'm going to highlight the next activity, which is FGD or Focus Group Discussion. So, what it is all about? So let's explore. So, what is FGD? In terms of definition, I took one definition from Kruger and Casey in 2009, who says that focus group interviews typically have 5 characteristics or features. So people who possess certain characteristics, and they provide qualitative data in a focus group in a focus discussion to help understand the topic of interest. So FGD, for your information, is one of the techniques in conducting qualitative research. So um, it is actually one reliable type of techniques that you can use when you want to have qualitative data. But also, interestingly, there are great increase in the number of the use of FGD in selection process. So some of the big companies, multinational companies, apply FGD in their selection process, employees selection process, to make sure that the applicants are not only able to talk, but also how to respond and show their positive attitudes. So in focus group discussion, we explore perceptions, opinion, attitudes, personal experience, and also interaction. So there are a lot of types that includes, which you can read yourself. So why we need to use focus groups? So in a real setting, it is used to find solution, and it can also benefit to deepen understanding of quantitative data. Another perspective is to explore differences and commonalities, which also investigating complex ideas and behaviors. So focus group discussion is very interesting because we can see how people differently think, and also how people can say or state their opinion with different language, different attitudes, and that is what makes FGD interesting. So there are advantages and disadvantages of focus group discussion. Um, on the left side, it presents the advantages, and one of them is allow for in-depth data to be gathered, because not only focus in certain topics, but the FGD is able to explore the related ideas connected with the topic. However, it's somehow difficult to distinguish between individual or group opinions, because everyone is giving and taking. So we're not really sure whether certain point is personal opinions or groups opinions. All right, so the other advantages and disadvantages you can analyze yourself later. How do we do that? In a real setting, you need to determine the topic and goals of the focus group. So you need to identify what is the topic of the FGD, and the next thing to do is to identify potential participants to talk about the topic. And later on, you need to prepare a guide. The guide referred to the moderator guide or perhaps the discussion guide that outlines the focus group questions. Then you can choose the location, and then recruiting the participants who will later on will receive the incentives of taking part in FGD. Next, there will be implementation stage in which you will conduct a 90 to 120-minute session led by a trained moderator. And lastly, the researcher will need to analyze the session and present a thorough written or oral report. This is what happened in the real setting, but we will need to adjust it in our class. So don't worry. On the next slide, I would like to focus on ethics because when we do research, we need to talk about how the moral values and principles attached to our work. So, in the real research situation, you need to allow time for ethics approval. So, you need to make sure that all the participants involved in the FGD have the ethical approval. So they are voluntarily join or participate in your study. So that is actually the idea. So you need to check that the data is stored, and you need to also maintain the confidentiality and also anonymity. Confidentiality refers to the how confidential, how secret the information is, because sometimes when we talk about certain issue, and it spread in public, people will think differently. And therefore, confidentiality is one of the key topic in ethics. And then anonymity means that when we report the result of the FGD, it's great to have anonymous um, identity instead of writing the real name of the participants. This is conducted in terms of ethics to protect their identity. Okay, next, you can see the ground rules of the FGD. The first one is express ideas clearly and concisely. So speak very concise and clear. And then listen to what others says, and that's how you respond to their opinion. Next is do not interrupt when others are speaking. So this is general rules in discussion. Make only relevant remarks. Accept criticism gracefully. So don't get very baper with when someone is disagree with your perspective. Next is help to reach conclusions. So what you have mentioned as your opinion somehow will shape the group's conclusion, and it will shape how the group will think in the whole process. Next, in the FGD, there is an important person who will play part as facilitator and also note taker. An FGD facilitator is responsible for introducing the FGD to all the participants, guide the discussion, facilitate the participation, ensure that the most important topics are covered, considering the time available, and finally close the discussion. So the facilitator is like the moderator. So they are in the same idea. The note taker in the real setting is someone who is responsible for capturing the discussion, and later on they will elaborate the notes. So this will be used in the real FGD setting. But in our class, we just need the facilitator and participants. So do the facilitator, what do they do, the facilitators? So characteristics of facilitators are pre-shaped understandings. So the person needs to understand the context well and perceived by the focus group. So everyone knows the person, right? And gender and age, personal attitude, it's also can carefully considered. How to pose a question? You need to have open-ended instead of closed-ended. Open-ended is the questions that can be answered in a more elaborative way. So there is no yes or no answer like, have you had your breakfast? So that is closed-ended because the answer is just yes or no. But when you have open-ended questions, the responses could be unpredictable or can be unexpected. Leading and dichotomous yes or no questions should be avoided. As I mentioned before, it's okay, but it needs to be avoided. Pre-shape understanding shall not be reflected in the questions. Here, you need to make sure that although you have comprehended the issue well, you cannot shape the group's opinion towards something. You cannot really direct, or you cannot influence the people's opinion towards something with your words. So that's how you can play roles as facilitator. So another role of facilitators can be observed here. You need to be neutral, patient, don't guess, because if you don't understand about certain term, for example, you need to ask for clarification. So you can just ask, what is the meaning of your statement? So please feel free to do so. You can also clarify terminologies to make sure that all participants have common understanding of any terms. So for example, the term FGD needs to be clarified at the beginning, so all the participants know what they are talking about. Next, probe is, when necessary, ask participants to elaborate and encourage views by more people. For example, you can ask them, could you better explain in more detail? Can you give us an example? Anything to make sure that the participants elaborate or explain the answer. The last role is also to synthesize. So in here, the facilitator will try to guide the discussion beyond the individual contributions by participants by encouraging others to comment and build on the views presented. So you can ask the other participants' opinion about the certain participant. So for example, what do you think about uh, your friend's opinion about this? So that's how you elaborate more views on that area. One more thing that you need to consider is about the questions. Have 3 or 5 broad themes to focus, discuss, and list specific questions under this. So you need to carefully design what questions are to be used in the focus group discussion. Make sure it is open-ended and move from general to specific. So because people will think generally at the beginning, and then they can focus more on very detailed focus later on. So you can probe further for clarity or and completeness. And then it's great idea to ask for positive first, then the negatives. And therefore, make sure that you have the chronological approach in this context. Mm, one more concept that you need to do is about keep the question short and cover just one idea per question. Although you have the ability to create complex or compound complex sentence, please make sure that your questions are brief and concise, so it's more understandable by the participants. Now let's move on to the participants. It's usually 6 to 10 people, but it can be 4 to 15. But they need to feel comfortable as a group and have something in common. So for example, in this context, you are English department students, and they can have divergent opinions within the group. So it's, to me, it will be fun to have a very contrasting opinions in discussion rather than to have the similar or even the same ideas all the time. Okay. In the focus group, I have mentioned what you will do at the beginning and also at the end. At the beginning, you can introduce yourself and others with name badge. Okay, so make sure you have badge when you are presenting. And the next, explain the purpose of the group and what is going to happen. Next, remind about confidentiality and anonymity. So this one is not really necessary in our context. Ask if any questions about the information received. Start with general question, and the beginning will aim to cover 3 to 5 broad themes. At the end, you need to explain any admin procedures like claiming expenses if there are. In a real situation, sometimes people will be given incentives, for example, then you need to explain that at the end part of the FGD. and think and explain what will happen next and if they will be informed of the results. So it's great idea in the real research setting that the participants will is given information on how they will contribute to the research. So they know what their contributions are. Okay, let's have a look on the sample of the steps. Okay. Um, uh, wait. Okay, now on the screen you can see the sample of the steps that consists of opening, warm up, main body, and closure. So in the opening you can have icebreaker, ground rules, and also introduction. In the warm up you can relate the experience, stimulate the group interaction to make sure that the students are comfortable. And in the main body, you move to the more threatening or sensitive and complex questions. You can elicit deep responses, connect emergent data to complex and broad participation. So everyone can have um, equal opportunities to participate. And lastly, in the closure, you can end the closure type questions, summarize and refine, and etc. Invite final comments or insights. And yeah, another important thing is also to thank to the participants who involved in the study. Okay, so this is the example of what the facilitator will say in the FGD. You can greet the participant. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Ella, and as the moderator of this session, my role is to facilitate this group discussion. So the purpose of this group discussion is to talk about online learning. Okay, so then you mention about the topic. But before we start, I would like to remind that there are no rights or wrong answers in this discussion. We are interested in knowing what each of you think. So please feel free to be frank and to share your point of view. So it is very important that we hear all your opinions. Oke, so ini ada 1, 2, 3. Nah, setelah kalian menyebutkan the purpose of this group discussion, lalu kalian bisa menyebutkan pertanyaan awal secara general. Tetapi sebelumnya, if you want to have like a introduction part at the beginning, after your introduction, then please feel free to do so. So, for example, you can say, my name is Ella and I'm as the moderator of the session. My role is to facilitate this group discussion. However, it's a great idea for us to know each other better. So can you please mention your name and then your educational background, for example? So you can do that in this FGD. And again, the reason is why you need to have that interaction, because you want to make sure that the participants feel relaxed, they feel comfortable, they feel that they are safe in that environment. Okay, the next thing to consider is you need to go beyond this 5WH question. Maksudnya gimana? So let's have a look at this one. Okay, so who is this man? Socrates. Okay, so tea. What is tea? Sure, it's the stuff in the pot. How do you know it's in the pot? Just pour the tea, Socrates. Okay, so if you know the person, Socrates is a very is a famous of being a person who think deeply, and kalau di dalam bahasa Indonesia dia philosopher. So one of the quote I can think of is that I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. So that's what the learning process is. So here, in this occasion, I would like to introduce the idea of 6 types of Socratic questions. Jadi ada 6 jenis Socratic questions that focus in different areas. So when we want to have clarifying thinking and understanding, so you can ask these questions. When you want to challenge assumptions, you can probe this question. Another type of question is examining evidence and rationale. Like why? How do you know? How do you know about this? So you want to make sure that the participants know the evidence is reliable or not. So challenging an assumption. Oh ya, ini tadi udah aku sebutkan ya. Okay, so considering alternatives or perspective. So are there any alternatives in that point? So for example, you want to find some suggestions and you can think of other alternatives to that. So you can use this when you try to design the questions for your FGD. So what should we do next? Create an FGD session with 5 informed members. Okay, so it should be in group, consists of 5 students. Now, one student becomes the moderator or facilitator, so the other 4 students are the participants. Paham ya? Satu orang menjadi moderator dan yang lainnya menjadi participants. No note takers. The length will be 40 minutes, only one Zoom session, and the topic addressed needs to be one of the following taboo issue. Number one sebenarnya nggak tabu sih, tapi mungkin akan seru untuk didiskusikan. The first one is online class in COVID-19 pandemic. So what do you think? And then perhaps you can think of suggestion to teachers, to schools, to anyone. You can explore a lot of angles in this. And talking about online class is not only in our context, right? You can talk about online class in elementary school, kindergarten, any levels, any angles. Number 2 is teenage sex workers. So this is something true and happens behind the line. So somehow it happens around us, regardless we know that or not. So have a thought on that will not only open your mind, but also to show you how the real situation is, and you can think of the social issue further. LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. I put another one is transgender here. So you can explore a lot of issues in transgender or even LGBT, whether you think that it should be legalized, whether it should be punished, whether it should be anything. So you can think of any research, you can think of any examples, anything. A last topic that I want you to talk about is about virginity. I'm thinking of the social phenomenon that perhaps you heard few years ago, that it says that most of high school students here in Malang are not the female students are not virgin anymore. And it's just too bad that the highlights is on the girls, not on the boys. So you can explore a lot of angles in this context. So for this, you need to decide the roles, who will be the facilitator, who will be the participants, and make sure you have the badge to ease the scoring process. Maksudnya adalah kalian harus ketika nanti action, harus ada nama yang aku bisa lihat. Jadi aku bisa tahu, oh ini si A, aku tahu ini si B, C, dan seterusnya. Why? It will be used for me to ease the scoring process. Jadi ini akan dinilai secara individual dan aku tahu, oh orang yang A berarti yang siapa gitu. Next, you need to formulate the ground rules yang boleh diadaptasi dari yang tadi sudah dipresentasikan. Formulate the main and probing questions. This is how you explore the topic well, by asking questions in general and then more focused for the detail. Make sure that the participants are well informed about the topic. So, saya ekspektasinya adalah all the participants have read related reliable information. Jadi akan seru seandainya setiap orang punya data yang keren. Misalnya you can talk about statistical data, you can refer to the example of certain case happening in your neighborhood, for example, happening in different part of the world, or you can refer to the certain reports published by UN, UNICEF, anything. But you need to make sure that it's reliable. So please don't read from Wikipedia. Then you need to arrange the meeting online, make sure that everyone are available. Then you can talk and engage comfortably. And lastly, you need to conclude the points. So for example, there are 5 reasons why we should respect the rights of transgender. Then you present the 5 reasons based on your discussion. And later on, you will also come up with the action, like what will you do to respect the rights of transgender? Okay, you know what I mean? So the discussion for 40 minutes will highlight a lot of perspectives. And I really hope that the conclusion comes up with a lot of angles. Okay. So you will be assessed individually. So although you have done the work at the beginning, the administrative things in group, but in the implementation, you will be assessed individually. And again, there is no right and wrong answer. I will not score whether it is that's correct, that's incorrect. No. So the more importantly, you state your opinion with evidence. The evidence, you can have examples, you can have quotes from research, for example, or from the articles you have read, not from Wikipedia, anything. And there will be a language component that I will oversee, like fluency, accuracy, pronunciation, engagement, and also the attitudes in the discussion. So in this discussion, we know that some people perhaps like to dominate, and please don't do so. Please provide equal opportunities for the other people to contribute. And then please do make sure that you also respect their perspective, because it's not about right or wrong. Okay, so more information, you can go to this link. And yeah, to close this presentation, I need to make sure that no matter how messed up you think you are, there will always be someone who loves you and think that you're amazing. Okay, so keep on swimming, keep on doing. So thank you for everything. So I hope that you can work well in this project. Thank you very much. That's all from me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.